Good evening, everyone. My name is Angela Lombardi. I'm the Director of Outreach and Audience Engagement at the North Carolina Museum of Art in Raleigh, North Carolina, which we are situated on the ancestral lands of the Occaneechi Band of Saponi Nation. And I am thrilled to be welcoming Nancy Strickland Fields, the curator and director of the Museum of the Southeast American Indian in Pembroke, North Carolina, to be moderating the conversation this evening. And I will hand it over to Nancy.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Angela. And thank you and the North Carolina Museum of Art for creating this platform and this event tonight. This will be a wonderful discussion around a very important topic. Um, this evening, we are going to have a discussion with three amazing artists, Anita Fields, Tally Weinberg, and Yatika Fields. And their art is uniquely situated in the themes and issues that are related to the environment. So their work has a strong breadth of not only covering the environment, but also other topics, cultural issues. And we thought that we would just take a few minutes and allow them to introduce themselves and share some of their work before we jump into the theme for this evening. So we are going to start with Miss Anita Fields and let her kick off our program for this evening.
All right. Thank you, Nancy. And I thank you to the museum for the opportunity to be able to join Yatika and Tally tonight for this conversation. I'm joining you from Tulsa, Oklahoma, on the territory of the Muskogee Creek Nation. And I'm primarily a ceramist, but I also do textile work and the combination of the two. A lot of my work centers around the philosophies and the ideas put forward by hundreds of years of observation of Osage people of the natural world. And so lots of my work is centered around these kinds of thoughts and these kinds of ideas. This first image that you see here is printed on silk. And in the very first image that you saw of all of our work, you saw a coat. Then it has an installation of symbols hanging from the ceiling. And this is the inside of one of those coats. That's an Osage wedding coat. You see the words in our Osage orthography. They are the words for the earth and the sky. That is Hunka and Sisho. So, this is what I'm talking about when I incorporate a lot of these kinds of thoughts about how we see the world as an Osage person and that kind of thinking. In the center there is an image of my great grandfather. And above that is a treaty, one of the major treaties that kept moving us, out of our ancestral homelands. But you also see that intersecting with images of oil wells and cone flowers and Osage ribbon work, which we're an oil tribe. Became very wealthy in the early 1900s because oil was discovered on our reservation. And so, I'm interconnecting all of these images and all of these kinds of thoughts as to, where we are in the present time in the world, in the contemporary world as Osage people. Next. And this is a clay form, an enclosed form, hand built with coils and slabs. I use a lot of distorted writing on my forms, and the distorted writing. I sometimes don't feel that I need to just come out and say what I'm trying, the thoughts that I'm having in my mind when I'm creating a piece. But this piece is talking about the power of nature and the power, the weather and the kinds of things that we have as human beings. We have no control over those kinds of things. My work is also known for its textured layers and heavily applied textures. So you see that in the landscape form, as it's kind of coming down to the right-hand side of the form. And then we have this, element of the weather. And an interesting thing that happens here in Oklahoma, we're known for our really wild weather here. And when this activity is taking place, many times it seems though that there's a green haze in the sky, and it feels like color is just kind of obliterated from the earth, and it almost looks like a black and white photograph because of what's happening with the elements, the natural elements. Next. This is another landscape form, and this is called Movement of the Sun. And again, textures, multiple patterning. I do this in my process, with my mediums, is that I use underglazes and glazes and stains with from red iron oxide, right out of the earth, to make these instances of landscapes. And the gold elements in the sky are remnant, thought of the sun, the importance of the sun, because that's another element in Osage thought, is different time periods during the day and why they are important to us, how we view those as Osage people. So that would be, when the sun comes up at dawn, that would be at noon, that would be when the sun goes down, and and then midnight. So these are really important times for us in terms of ceremony, and in terms of a proper time in the day to request prayer and those kinds of things. Next. This is a wall piece. It's formed from 2 pieces. And again, it's about our relationship between our lives as human beings and our relationship to the elements of the earth. And again, another, powerful storm is approaching the landscape, but you also see a figure down there that is part of the landscape, that is part of the earth, that is part of, so that there's no separation, from us as human beings into our relationship with the earth and the environment and nature. So, but you see those really heavy textured areas, and I make those by making stamps with my clay, like when I take a walk or something, so that those are, those become part of my language, part of the story I'm trying to tell. Next. I do a lot of figurative work, and these figures represent resistors. We live in a time period right now where this is really relevant, and people responding to the government and the things that are happening to us in contemporary world in terms of the environment, pipelines, this kinds of things, the destruction of the environment. So these are, human beings that are protesting and resistors. Next. That's mine.
That's perfect. And we'll circle back around and dig a little deeper into some of those pieces and look at more of the topics and themes and symbolism in your work. Absolutely. Okay, next we want to segue to Tali and to share a little bit more about your work and who you are as an artist and the issues that are important to you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Nancy and Angela, for hosting. And Yatika and Anita, it's great to be in conversation with all of you. For the last 6 years, I've been making work primarily in response to the ever worsening climate crisis. And this work is, tracing connections really between our human bodies and the earth, between personal and communal loss in the context of climate crisis. Each piece within this body of work starts with climate data from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which I'm then translating or materializing into abstracted landscapes and waterscapes. And I'm materializing the data as weaving and as coiled sculpture, primarily using plant fibers and dyes, but also some petrochemical derived medical tubing and fishing line. Next. So just to share a few pieces from this body of work, This is dislocations from 2019. And each piece within the dislocation series is an interpretation of temperature data for a place that I've called home, interwoven with temperature data for the world's oceans. So one line of data from the state, one from the oceans, one from the state, one from the oceans. And the colors and the structures are really based on my memories or connotations of each place's landscape. So from left to right, the industrial agricultural cornfields and the prairie of central Illinois, New York City's gridded streets and skyscrapers, Oklahoma's iconic red soil, and the hills of central California that in the period I was living there seemed to go from year-round flowers to year-round fires. And so what you can see in this piece is that the data is this starting point. It's like a kind of scaffolding, but it's not really a data visualization because my process is giving equal weight in decision-making to landscape, to the body, to my personal and political relationships to places. Next. Just my dog joining in, sorry. So this is fault lines, also from 2019, made around the same time. And this piece, each of the 6 panels is 94 to 125 years of temperature data for each of the top 6 oil extracting states in the US. So that's Texas, North Dakota, Alaska, California, New Mexico, and Oklahoma. And this piece is really responding to sort of the intersections of climate crisis, oil extraction, and the state, and thinking about how in 2018, the US became the largest extractor of oil and gas in the world, even as climate crisis was getting worse and worse. And so much of this continued extraction and the violence of extraction is then justified using the same kind of patriotic language that politicians use to justify wars. So the piece is actually the same size as a flag that would normally be used to cover the coffins of a soldier who comes home or who does not come home from war. So it's 9.5 feet by 5 feet. So thinking about climate crisis and the casualties of extraction. Next. Is there a slide missing? There we go. Okay, so this piece is Bound. It's called Bound. It's really about different kinds of relationships or entanglements in the context of climate crisis. Bound is comprised of 137 years of temperature data for 300 places around the world, materialized as 1,500 feet of thread-wrapped petroleum-derived medical tubing that has been divided into 5 to 6 foot lengths. And I worked on this piece for 2 years with the assistance of 9 other women. The data is expressed along each tube. Sorry, could you jump back to the other photo you were on? There we go. And for me, starting to use the medical tubing was a way to get at how extraction is both harming our bodies and the earth, and also just how entangled we are with the industry. So as pipelines are crisscrossing the earth, the medical tubing is this petroleum-derived product, a plastic pipeline that is going through and around our bodies, and it's often used for medical interventions for illnesses that have the same causes as climate crisis. So just thinking about all of those layers of our relationship to extraction in the context of crisis. And I'll just briefly run through these next couple of slides. So because I worked on Bound for over 2 years, I was exhibiting it iteratively in small pieces, basically. And every time I installed it, I could rearrange the tubes and sort of think about different aspects of relationship to climate crisis. So in the first iteration, it was a 24-inch by 60-inch by 10-inch knot, a landscape crisscrossed by oil and gas pipelines. And that was in a show, an exhibition about land use in Oklahoma. Next. Oops. Is there an image missing? There you go. So the second installation was in Asheville, North Carolina. It was this kind of swirl of a storm moving across a weather map. And this was 32 of those 300 tubes. And, I had been reflecting on the storms that had happened a year earlier in Texas and Puerto Rico, but it just happened that I installed this piece a few days after Hurricane Florence hit North Carolina as well. Next. And then the third iteration on the left was much smaller. So this was more personal. I had knotted together the tubes for data for 3 cities that I had called home: New York, San Francisco, and Tulsa. The fourth, installed later in 2019, sort of became this carpet, thinking about how climate crisis at that point had become so much the ground we walk on. Next. And then this last image, so this is the 5th iteration of Bound. This is 10 feet by 6 feet, and this was the first time that all 300 tubes, or all 300 data sets, were displayed together. And as I was installing it, I was sort of reflecting on my experience of living in Tulsa, and how 6 months prior to this exhibition, in the spring of 2019, there had been these extreme storms that had transformed the Arkansas River. And when I had first moved to Tulsa at the beginning of 2017, the Arkansas River was kind of this trickle of brown, rimmed by oil refineries. And in the context of these storms, the Arkansas River overflowed its banks, and it even swallowed up homes in some areas, and it unearthed this 50-year-old plastic waste from nearby landfills. So while I don't necessarily expect that someone sees a river when they're looking at this piece, that was, kind of what I was meditating on as I was installing it. And I think I'll stop there and can always jump back during questions. Thank you.
Thank you. You mentioned the hurricanes in North Carolina, and as I saw that piece, it just really spoke to me. Being here in North Carolina, especially in the eastern part of the state, we have been absolutely crippled by hurricanes and the lingering effects on the land from not so much the hurricanes, which are devastating and reoccurring, but the environmental issues that are compounded by the hurricanes. Right. So yes, very poignant and wonderful work to bring awareness. We'll talk more about that. Yes.
Definitely. Thank you.
And next, we have Yatika Fields. And if you'd like to share some about your work, I have always appreciated Yatika's murals and paintings. They just seem so three-dimensional, like you could jump in and experience this whole new world. So could you share a little bit about yourself as an artist and your work?
Of course. Thank you, Nancy and Angela. Thank you, North Carolina Museum of Art, for hosting and having this conversation. Tally, it's good to hear your voice and your work. It's always great to hear about it, and beautiful to see, and so powerful and poignant. So happy to be on the panel with you. And my mother, Anita Fields, who the viewers, if you don't know, she's my mother. And I grew up in an artistic household, so I'm thankful for that. And I think it's definitely the reason I'm the artist that I am today. And I'm here going to discuss the work that you're going to be seeing. So I'm a painter. I grew up drawing and painting, and I've kind of navigated my way as a stylized colorist. In the last 10 years, it's kind of evolved from finding a departure from abstraction to kind of being more representational with symbolism and motifs pertaining to who I am as an individual, pertaining to my culture and heritage, and also pertaining to contemporary landscapes of the world, not only just America, but the world, because I've been very fortunate to travel the world with my work and see a lot of countries and participate in events and participate in communities and work with other artists around the globe. In that 10 years, my work has also shifted from outside of the studio to go further upon the walls onto large scale murals. And I'd say maybe about 5 murals a year, with mostly my main focus being studio work and large scale oil painting. I still feel like there's a lot to explore in my approach and how I paint with oil paints and what I want to express and what I want to talk about. The painting that you're looking at now is called America Realized. And I think in the last, year, 2020, and especially in the last couple of days, that we've realized a lot. Well, it seems like we're realizing a lot about America, the unfortunate events of it and the effects of what, capitalism, colonialism has had on us and has had upon individuals of color and communities and Native Americans and then indigenous people all around the world. This painting, America Realized, goes back to 2016, and it's a reflection on my time at Standing Rock. I did about 5 paintings based on that. This is about 75 by 75, so it's like 5 foot something. It's a pretty big painting, and it talks about, the time when I was there. It was really cold. I was there in the fall and also into the winter when it was about 10 below, 15 below, 20 below, and you could still see the dapple lights in the distance, drones flying ahead, tents and teepees catching fire here and there because people are trying to stay warm with the fire in between, and then the propane tanks blowing up because of the excessive use. It was a pretty chaotic and surreal scene, but also it was very powerful in the fact that we were all there together to try to stop something that was impeding on our territories, on our lands, and really trying to put, as with the pipeline, kind of create some kind of stress upon the reservation that was getting to us, but also something that could poison our drinking water. And just like my mom said with her work, or what Callie's saying with her work too, it's a meditation on the land and kind of thinking about the effects and the process of that through the individuals in both parties who are involved in it. So this painting is kind of about that, a look into that. There's the chaos of it, and there's the cold, that we have the natural elements of the seasons, and then it's kind of going into the skull of who we are as Americans. And then you have these symbols, we're almost being played as American people. And in fact, that's exactly what's being had. If we keep following the same line that we're on trajectory, we're just going to be played until I don't know what kind of existence. But this is kind of a look at that situation in the land and taking images from that. You have tents over here, and I can go further into tents and paintings and series that I did in resistance camps and homeless encampments, and how that's kind of entangled into the same kind of dialogue within the American construct. And so you have this kind of seasonal winds coming up and blowing into the face of the person being played, and you see the drone up there. So there's a lot of elements. It's like an allegory of what was going on at that moment. Next. Then landscape paintings are a big part of my practice. I started landscape painting in 2000 when I went to study landscape painting in Italy with a mentor of mine and some other students from Oklahoma State University. And it was at that time in 2000 where I became really intrigued in the landscape and looking into it and finding colors that I never saw before, and understanding how to really kind of create layers and create colors to find what it is I'm looking at. But to be in the moment with the land and meditating on it and allowing my hand to just kind of feel the essence of what I'm seeing and feel the essence of what I'm in, rather than trying to just really paint something that I'm seeing. I'm trying to allow myself to paint what I feel. And from 2000, I've been doing landscape paintings every year since then. So, I've been painting landscapes for 20 years now. And this was a painting that was shown at the Oklahoma City Contemporary Museum at their inaugural exhibition, Bright Golden Haze. And this painting was called Eternal Sun. This painting is about 8 foot by 17 feet, I believe. So it's very, very large, and it's an oil painting. And it's reminiscent of different memories and times when I've been on the trails and mountains. So I'm kind of taking different notes that I've kept in my mind and different studies and kind of forming it into one, but allowing the freedom to take place from everything that I've understood and known from landscape painting, from my memories in my hand and the motions and everything that I've been a part of, that I've understood, and that I've allowed myself to experience in the last 20 years. Again, using the landscape technique and style of understanding of the linear constructs of how I do paint landscapes and the horizon line and things like that. I wanted to approach this painting, which is another part of the series, Standing Rock series that I did. This is called White Buffalo Calf Women March. And it was a march that took place in December, I believe. And I was there, I think it was either November or December, but it took place at Standing Rock, and it was all women march to the front lines and back. And it was a very cold day, very beautiful, moving moment. All the women wearing white, carrying white flags. And there's the medium line coming to and from, you know, and it's a metaphor kind of for life, with the horizon lines being both on ends. It's kind of like you are the sun and you're looking at it and it's just rotating. So with this painting, I want to create a new composition, something that would challenge the viewers and also challenge myself as a painter to kind of create that moment that I was witnessing for us. Where are they going? Where are they going? It's definitely an image of with boots. So it's like boots on the ground, kind of throwing in this military kind of component to it. But who's the military here? You know, who's fighting what? It leaves a lot of the viewer guessing, but you can also tell that it's kind of a moving moment, whether it's, you know, so it's allowing you to try to wonder and guess. And all of my work, I would say, the styles around it that I try to construct is that I want people to kind of free associate with it, to come up with their own stories and moments, because everyone is going to see something different in my work. And it's going to relate to something that relates to their memories of them and growing up and what they think of the situation, or how they grew up and how they see art, or what America is to them and things like that. This painting was called Sami Solidarity, and the Samis are up in Norway, and they're indigenous to Scandinavia, and they're there at Standing Rock to come and be in solidarity with the indigenous peoples of North America, because when we come together to fight these you know, intrusions, we have to come together and be strong, just as we've seen to fight, you know, white supremacy. We all have to come together and fight this. So you can't do it alone. And as they're going through the same things up in their continents and countries with oil and fishing rights and land rights, the same thing. It's important that, you know, we see their situation, their fights, and come together with them. So I was able to see them there at Standing Rock and get a photo of them, and then create a painting about them as well. You can see the juxtaposition of the teepees and them there. So it's kind of like this duality and juxtaposition of two indigenous cultures in one painting. This is a mural that I did, and I wanted to include this painting because it kind of shows the aspects of my mural work compared to my studio work, which is Semi-Solidarity, which is a studio work in oils. And then you see this painting, which is a very large scale by 40, you know, it's like 15 feet by 40, 50 feet done in spray paint. And this was done 2 years ago at the Volkenkunde Museum in Leiden, Netherlands. And this was a part of the exhibition that is ongoing right now, I believe. And it's in part to the 400-year commemoration of colonial existence in Americas. And in Leiden, in the Netherlands, there were a lot of pilgrims that were a part of the Mayflower that came over. And so they celebrate it in a different context than they do. But now, since we've been having these conversations in Volkenkunde, and individuals having conversations about, the celebration and what are we really celebrating, then a lot of the people are really starting to take notice and have a different kind of narrative to it and listen to the indigenous people, even in Europe, which is a start for a lot of new changes, I think. I know. And just as a couple of other projects that were set to happen in the UK this year, other similar projects are happening around Europe as well. And this was a part of that. So this is kind of just shows the resilience of the indigenous people that have come a long way to kind of be present, to be able to stay vibrant and stay strong. And this is a landscape painting that I did while I was at Standing Rock as well. And I wanted to add this one in just because it was the image of me on the promotional material for this talk that showed me painting on the ground. This was the painting that I was painting, actually. It's called the Hunk Papa Camp. And I was painting these two teepees out there, and this was the most northern point of Oshete Sakowin Camp. And then over here across the river were all the police and, the dapple lights and everything. So you can't see over here, but there's so many people, thousands of people in camp. So this is the most northern point of it. And there were people picking sage and stuff in there. And I didn't know, but later that night I would be in there in a ceremony, in a Native American church ceremony. And so it was a Lakota meeting, and it was my first time to attend one of those up there. And it was a really beautiful experience because we got to be, on the land up there and experience their ceremonies. It was only for Native people to be in there. There's maybe about 15 of us. And I just remember during the night in there, thinking, wow, I was up on that hill painting it. I didn't know I'd be sitting in there that night, practicing in my spirituality, but also, doing it along with them and their way and seeing how that is. And we were praying, for the camp and the water and everything like that. So this painting is a bit more special in that way, just because I got to really experience the inside of that teepee, not knowing that I was going to be doing that when I was painting it. But a lot of these times when I'm traveling, I paint landscapes and I bring paper with me and watercolors, and I try to do hour studies. And this is a way just for me to connect to the lands that I'm at and where I'm seeing and traveling. But also to keep my hand moving and to understand the fluidity and just to feel the places, as opposed to just being in it and being a tourist, but really being in it and in this way of creating it.
Thank you. I think that is the important aspect for our discussion tonight, is like how we stay connected and how we feel and understand what's happening as it relates to environment and climate change and these issues. Okay, I want to circle back around in our format for tonight and talk with Anita and ask a couple of questions. I'll ask 2 questions for each panelist. So Anita, you talked about how your work intersects and is interconnected with symbols and representation of Osage culture and identity. And you touched on this a little bit, but can you share more about how you include aspects of environment in your work, either or both from a cultural understanding or in a way that addresses environmental issues or concerns?
Sure. So, as I was saying earlier, and maybe we can put up one of the images. Actually, one of the landscapes would be fine while I'm talking. So, much of my work centers around Osage philosophy, ideas, thoughts, that have been hundreds of years, that are based on hundreds of years of observation of the earth. And so our worldview and our philosophies are based on these observations and then put into action, by ways of organizing everything, so they saw in nature that everything has order. And so then they took that thought and patterned order into everything, including the way that our villages were set up. They were in the recognition of our relationship, to the earth and the sky. And so this was based on their observation of all of these things. So it was acknowledging the earth, sky, and water. And I just find those concepts so fascinating. And I find that such a large place to be able to think about my work and, to make comment on those kinds of ideas and thought. Because you still see those ideas come up today, even though we are contemporary Osage people, you will see those kinds of ideas and thoughts, come up and materialized. And that brings me great comfort when I recognize that, if I'm at home in a gathering, when I recognize that, I find that very comforting, because I know that it's something that's very, very old and that has, survived to this day. So the materials, that I use are from nature. I use, the earth, and the earth holds a memory. I have been very privileged to be able to go to some of our original homelands, and it's a very powerful experience, to stand there and to see sites that are, that were sacred to us, and how they are laid out, into, and again, this relationship to the sun, and to the, how the sun hits the earth. And so, these ideas are put forward in that way, actually in landscape placements of rocks and these kinds of different things. So, these are powerful experiences. And I also draw upon that many times, when I'm making my work. And because I use clay, and I, know how clay is formed over, thousands and thousands of years of erosion and movement, of the earth, in connection with the weather. This idea of the earth holding a memory of the people who have been there before, I also find this really inspiring. Along with that is the idea that this memory is always there. And clay as a material, in terms of process, clay actually has a memory. Clay actually has a lot of elements in it that are very human-like. When I say clay has a memory, if I'm working on a slab of clay and I tear it and I try to repair that, it's kind of like it never forgets that I tore it there. And so that might, when I start to fire it, that it might rip right there. So, I find these qualities that it has, that are very close to, human qualities, really fascinating also. Let's see, some of the other things, that I thought about were that, I think the importance of, trying to address things concerning nature are that, my thoughts are today that we're so disconnected from nature, and we are so disconnected from these feelings about the earth and what the earth provides for us. And, when I say that in our native culture, when I was talking about these ideas and these philosophies, that's built in, this respect for the earth, this respect for what it provides for you. I mean, when people say Mother Earth, it truly is Mother Earth. It provides everything for us. It provides our food. It provides, water. We cannot live without water. We cannot make water. And so, all of these concepts are built into that. And today when I was kind of thinking about, what to say tonight, I started thinking about these folks that are really close to me, and my these Sac and Fox folks. And my sister's dad told me one time, he said, we are at a point where we need to ask forgiveness of Mother Earth for what we have done to her, and how we have ravaged her and not respected her, and because she provides everything for us. So that's a lot, where, the kinds of things that I'm thinking about, when I'm making work that pertains to nature.
So your work is infused with all of this meaning. And as someone who is not an artist, but really I lean on and I rely on art to make stronger connections, more stronger than written word or text, or sometimes even conversations. the communication that an individual can have with art and the meaning that they take away from the work. How do you intend, or how do you hope that audiences engage with your work and glean that meaning from what you infuse in your art?
Well, one of the main things that I'm trying to say to folks is, and whether or not, they walk away with this kind of feeling, I'm not sure, because as Yatika was, talking about earlier, we, we don't ever know at what level, what we're trying to say is received, but is that there are, many, many ways of looking at how we live. There's many ways of looking at the world. It is not a one-way street. It is, it doesn't belong to one particular people. That there are many ways that people understand and know who we are in this world and our relationship to it. So, and I want people to also know that our native cultures, have beautiful, very deep and complex cultures, again, built upon hundreds and hundreds of years of observation, and that this is still alive today. Our communities are very vibrant, they're alive, and that these thoughts, still run through our communities. So I want people to know that basically there's another way of looking at the world, and even though we are in a place that we all call home and reside, that there are other ways of seeing the world.
That definitely is communicated. I can confirm that these dynamic worldviews that are expressed through your work, through all of your work, is very dynamic and moving and inspiring for people to go and learn and research more. And I think as important as it is to understand the kind of the science and the data, all of these elements that you're talking about, staying engaged with, staying connected to Earth itself, and staying in tune with the importance of that we only have one planet, and that she is Mother Earth, and how to honor and respect that, and kind of feel actionable on an individual level, kind of as that starting point. So yes, I'm already inspired by what you're saying. For the sake of time and the panel, I do want to move on to Tally and talk about her work. And thank you, Anita, for sharing that about your art. And just like Anita and Yatika, Tally, your work in multimedia is infused with themes of climate change. You also address topics of what are called industry illness and displacement. So we've looked at some of the unique materials that you use, but can you also talk about the methods and how you employ data and information into your art to bring awareness about these issues that you're passionate about?
Yeah, thank you. Angela, could you maybe pull up the first image from the studio shot? So as I mentioned earlier, a lot of the work is woven on a loom. I think can you go to the image that's me at the loom with the threads in front of it? Thank you. And so I'm weaving with these plant fibers and dyes. And I've also started incorporating this petrochemical derived material in order to interpret NOAA data. And so I was drawn to data both because of its connection to the mathematical patterning of weaving, and also to the limitations of what data can convey. So the first weavings that I did incorporating the climate data were actually kind of a critique of data visualization, thinking about data as this relatively patriarchal, Western, capitalist, and colonial form of knowledge. And that it's of course useful in its capacity to condense a vast amount of labor and time and knowledge from across scientific disciplines into a form that we can digest really quickly. but this is an abstraction, and that abstraction has its shortfalls. So in the selection of what is communicated through data, other things are obscured. And in choosing to weave the data, I feel as though part of what I'm doing is sort of reinserting that time, reinserting some labor, reinserting the materiality of it, and also reinserting other forms of knowledge. So knowledge that's embodied, knowledge that's gendered female and indigenous and affective and relational. These are knowledges that have been systemically devalued by those who uphold patriarchy and settler colonialism. And weaving, of course, embodying these knowledges has also been devalued within these systems because of who has traditionally done the work. So at the same time, when I'm using weaving, weaving has this history, has these global histories of being connected to resistance and serving as a kind of subversive language, often for women and for other marginalized people. And so that also to me sort of comes into this practice. And then I'll also say, so there's the data side of it, but weaving also in its kind of repetition and in its connections to ritual can also be seen in relationship to practices of grieving. And so in bringing this data into this material form, I feel as though part of what I'm doing is like merging practices of record keeping and grieving, and merging the scientific research and the lived experience, which are both important to sort of understanding climate crisis, or both are climate crisis. For the sake of time, maybe I'll stop there unless you want me to.
Well, I have another question for you that I think it's interesting with the data and with understanding knowledge systems and how you really position your work to have this really critical conversation to look at all of these systems, right, that we subscribe to or seem to be forced to subscribe to in Western society. How do you engage with that dialogue that you create through your work, and how does that inspire you, or how do you facilitate that dialogue that inherently comes from your work?
Yeah, that's a good question. Angela, if you want to pull up those last two images of the like the hands working, that would be great. So yeah, the work is definitely for me sort of a conversation opener, cross-disciplinary conversation opener. And so, people engage in that conversation in different levels. So for those viewing the work in a gallery, the title and the materials list are kind of these small entry points, ways of sort of shifting perspective on what someone is looking at. But I've also tried to use exhibitions as these other kinds of jumping off points. So when I had a 2-person show at the Center for Craft in Asheville, instead of just doing a regular artist talk, the other artist, Raina Dietrich, and I had an interdisciplinary panel and brought in a local climate activist and someone from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, just to sort of expand that dialogue. At an exhibition in Tulsa, instead of an artist talk, I organized a panel of writers, poets primarily, who could share their work, and then we could have a conversation about language and creative practice more broadly in relationship to climate crisis. One of the great things about having that fellowship in Tulsa was that I had the ability to bring other people into the project. So Bound, which I mentioned, was this piece that I worked on for 2 years, and I had 9 other women who came in for a few hours a week to help me with the wrapping of the tubes. And, that was a space for like a much slower, more casual conversation, some with people who are already involved in the art world, but most of the women I was working with, both weren't necessarily going to show up at a gallery otherwise, and also weren't necessarily talking about climate change. So that was really interesting. And then if you could go to that next image. The other thing I started doing pre-COVID was organizing these sensing climate workshops where people could create their own woven datascapes. And the workshops to me were kind of like this quilting bee style mix of group climate therapy and consciousness raising and craft workshop. So, it's a space for dialogue and a space for grieving and reflecting. And they always started with these conversations about our relationships to place, to climate grief, to landscape and color. And then we would walk through participants creating their own sort of personally meaningful color codes for a simplified data set. And then they learn basic weaving skills to produce their own small datascapes on a small loom. And that became this way of sort of sharing so much of the process of making the work for me has meaning as much as exhibiting. And that's a way for me to share that process and for people to really reflect more personally.
I appreciate, and I'm thinking more about this concept of, you said climate grief, but creating space to make something or engage with something that allows you to heal through process, which I think is equally as important. So there's this activism role, but now I'm hearing you talk about this sort of healing and grief processing role that almost has to happen in tandem.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think that they're separate. And I'm not necessarily sure I would call it healing. Right, like the process of grieving is what grief is anger, right? Is going through all of those layers of sadness and anger and denial and bargaining. And I feel like so many of us are doing that in different ways when it comes to climate crisis. Even if people aren't necessarily thinking about it at that scale, right? Like when you start to think about your relationship to your home, if you're living in Northern California and you're affected by fires, or you're just thinking about the place where you used to spend your childhood vacations on the beach and you can't go anymore. I'm just throwing out examples that have come up in some of the workshops, or just people's fears about what they might lose in the future. Some of sort of focusing in on like what you really care about and what you love, I think also fuels activism.
Yes. I think that is, I wish we had the luxury of like several hours to like really get this going. And Nita actually cautioned the beginning of the panel, like we're really going to get to a deep spot, and want to keep going. But I think that's a great segue for Yatika. And thank you, Tally, for sharing your work and insights about your work and your passions. Yatika's work is marked by environmental activism. Can you tell us how environmental activism inspires your art? And then how is that infused? Like, how does that inform process of either graffiti or landscapes, or how those fuse together? You touched on the experience at Standing Rock. I think was a great kind of beginning point about that.
Yeah, when it comes to environmental activism and the environment and our place in it, and then being an artist, I think, you have the decision, do you want to make work about it? Do you want to make work about the land? Or do you want to kind of, be complacent in it and not, and just make work for museums and galleries for the pretty eyes and pretty things, I mean, it's a very serious subject. It's a deep subject. It's a deep dialogue. It takes a lot of strength to navigate it and to talk about it and discuss it. I wouldn't call myself an environmental artist or activist at all. I'm an artist. I'm indigenous. I care about our lands. I care about our ways for sure, and I care about our histories to be told right. A lot of things that are hidden from us are because of the structures that are put in place by the governments and policies, and in those policies lie the things that damage the lands. Whether it's the oil, and whether it's agricultural taking of lands, and placing livestock to ruin ecosystems and things like that, decimating the buffalo, things like that. There's environmental racism that's been there. I mean, it just goes back, but my ancestors had to navigate that and be a part of that, and therefore I'm a part of it, and therefore I'm maybe a born environmental activist because of that. I'm an artist, and daily I think about what it is I'm going to make work about, because I've never been an artist that just makes work about one thing and I'm happy with that, because I found success in it. That would kill me inside, I think, if I did that. But because there's so much to say, there's so much to look at, and there's so much to be inspired by, to create. And I found that my thing is that I'm very versatile, and that's versatile in mediums, and that's versatile in the dialogue that I'm going to throw out there. But it's talking about how am I going to do that? What compositions am I going to do that? And what way can I do that most eloquently to touch people in a new way of seeing it that they can't get through Twitter, or through social media, or through a paper, but strictly through color and through the brush. Because I'm a firm believer in painting and the magic that it can do. I was listening to an artist talk, not an artist talk, but a conversation today on technologies and how artists are using them, and indigenous artists are using them. And I was thinking about what I do as an artist and how I kind of still keep, just using the brush and paint on canvas, and how I'm not really trying to work too hard and infusing technologies in it, but maybe the only way of allowing myself to show it, maybe through Instagram or Twitter, things like that. But how it also has a special place, how it's also modern by just me being involved in it today. So yeah, when it comes to making work, Standing Rock, I did talk about that because I saw it. I saw things that I'd never seen before, so I could make work about it. I could discuss it firsthand. And then I found success in a way with it that I felt comfortable in doing, that I understood. I found a rhythm in it, which I think carried on to making further works, which I don't know if I had the photos in here in it, but they're called Tint Metaphor paintings. And they were kind of a look into the homeless, crisis in America. I've seen it triple in Tulsa in the last 3 years, and it really first came about to me and when I was living in Seattle in the Pacific Northwest, just tents everywhere. I'd never seen that before anywhere. And then all along the West Coast, it's like that. Yeah, this piece right here. Tint Metaphor. So it's kind of looking at this composition and deconstructing the notions of why it is, and taking a look at it and investigating it. But then the solution for the viewer is just that, finding a solution to put it together in your own way. Why is it happening? How can we make it better? How can we alleviate this in America? How can we solve this problem? How can we work with it to help, the homeless crisis, then you have, the Trump administration, and they're really putting, just making it really difficult for anyone to be happy or survive here. So there's a lot of things that we're still feeling in America, and that's all the policies and environmental policies that we're fighting to be a better nation, whether it's, carbon emissions and things like that, and fossil fuels and the water and the ocean, I mean, I just heard today on the news, Thwart's glacier in Antarctica is melting more rapidly than they thought, because they found out that there's, a moving tide of warm water going underneath it. And so it's legit that, New York and Florida probably will be gone in, I don't know how many years, but that the water is going to rise. And that's just the beginning of things, you know. I mean, we've seen an influx in climate, you know, drastically change every season, whether it's rain, winter, the cold, you know, blizzards. I mean, it snowed yesterday and it was sunny here. Everything's blossoming, and that's the first I've seen it. And older folks too said that's the first they've seen that kind of thing like that. So, I mean, we need to really kind of take an invest. It's just like Tally said, you know, find and pick what you are passionate about, you know, and compassionate when it comes to this, and then make a deal with it, make a pact, you know, to do better by yourself with it and try to make a better world of it. And that's how I kind of look at it as an artist. So, you know, my inspirations as an artist just kind of comes from my daily being with understanding the situation that we're in and then choosing to make work about it. That's not necessarily going to be pretty. That's not necessarily going to be hung in someone's house because it's a mantelpiece and it's beautiful, but because it needs to be made, you know, it needs to be looked at and seen. And I think the work today by artists are going to start maybe really, hopefully, be touching upon things like that, because that's where we are as a world, and that's where we are as artists. You know, long are the days when we could just, you know, sit back and, you know, paint like Matisse and things like that, because I think we have more serious problems to paint about and to talk about, you know, if you choose to do it. So, I mean, it's like Tally said, pick what you want and go for it. So I'm picking different things every day and deciding what medium I want to do it in, whether that's watercolor, spray paint, or oil paints or things like that.
You really poignantly captured my second question about how do you go about expressing or creating surrounding urgent topics or a sense of urgency that you feel about, that are real urgent topics that are happening in our world. So I appreciate that, like creating, sharing ideas, almost in a way using your work to reflect a mirror on what's happening. Because a relatable story is we in Charlotte have a really dire tent city situation here. And it's hard for people to find a solution about that, right? The humanity is lost in it. So human condition and environment and all of these things that are going on that are just sort of like bundled and jumbled together, trying to sort through that. Art has a really unique way of creating an illustration for us to kind of begin to problem solve, for lack of better words. So thank you. I think, Angela, we are at a good moment to take questions from the audience. If that would be a good segue, and I might be able to see.
Absolutely. And if you have a question for any of the artists or for Nancy Fields, you may put them into the chat or you can use the Q&A feature. Thank you. And maybe to get them going, if you all have questions for each other, I know that you all know each other, and if there is something that one of you has said that sparked an interest, I would love to hear your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I heard, like, something that Tally was saying, and that she said, you know, one of the things that she had enjoyed about being within the program in Tulsa is the coming together and working with other artists. I agree with that, and I think that's kind of part of it too, is sharing your experience and your skills and collaborating with others. Of course, you know, this is mostly, you know, a lot of pre-COVID stuff that was happening, but now as we're, you know, getting vaccinated and we're kind of moving in, I'm thinking maybe 2 years, hopefully, you know, we can really come together and form more collaborations to create platforms for outreach. Because Nancy, like you were saying, you know, it's finding ways to talk about it, but we have to create new ways, whether it's exhibitions and instead of artist talks, inviting other people who are, you know, professionals in that field that can talk about that, you know, and how we can further our arts initiatives to dive further into that, like Tally was doing, and Raina and what they did. I think it's examples like that that can, as artists, we have a lot of network and mobility, and we should transform that into newer platforms that don't exist to bring in others that don't have that,
So a question did come into the Q&A, and the question is for Anita specifically. Anita, how do you address online versus reality?
Oh, okay, online versus reality. Maybe I need that clarified a little bit.
If you did put that question into the Q&A, if you want to use the chat to clarify a little bit what you mean by online versus reality in pertaining to Anita's work, that would be great.
Just kind of thinking, I guess reality probably is different for everybody, I know certainly, just during the pandemic, an online presence is probably the strongest that it's ever been, for folks, in terms of trying to connect to other people, in terms of, seeking information. I know for myself, it's very quiet, very isolated. Didn't see very many people, and this kind of goes along with what Yatika was saying, and about the program. So we're in the Tulsa Artist Fellowship, and Tali was part of that, and it is crucial as an artist, to be able to get the viewpoints, of other artists, and to be able to collaborate and to be able to share ideas. And I think that's even important for somebody, like this is intergenerational. So, that certainly the ideas that, younger folks than I, have eye-opening, information for me. But reality for me is probably, what we're talking about here. And that is being able to enjoy your life, in the way that you're meant to do that. And that includes, a lot of times, being outside and being able to enjoy nature and being able to take part in that. And, that is disrupted. This is what this whole conversation is about. It's disrupted. And I mean, I can tell you, even as a child, I lived out in the country in Osage County, and the sound 24/7 of oil wells pumping, that was just a sound you're familiar with. It's just a sound that you grew up with. It was something that, so it was not always, birds chirping or, these kind of sounds that you would expect that, when you talk about nature, it's the constant rhythm of an oil well pumping.
Any other questions? I'm changing my view here to give us the Brady Bunch lineup so I can see everybody better. Well, I will say that I personally, in terms of the virtual versus in person, I definitely miss seeing folks. And let's see, someone has a comment here. What are some ways we might be able to have more intentional intergenerational dialogues? I think you all do that really wonderfully already through your work. Does anybody want to reply to that?
Okay, I'll reply briefly. Well, I think that artists, that's just one thing that we do. I mean, that's just kind of how we are. So making art isn't just relegated to a certain age group, or I mean, if you're an artist, you're that for your life. It doesn't stop at a certain age. Yatika and I actually are working on a project. We're collaborating right now, and that's kind of one of the things, you know, that we're talking about is that because it deals with activism, and it's just activism doesn't, you know, stop, you know, when you reach a certain age, just because, you know, you're getting older or something. I mean, you know, this this resonates within you, you know, as a person all the time. But I know, you know, when Talia was talking about her project, so you know, I would pass in the hall where her people were gathered, the women who would come to help her, and they were of all ages. You know, they were of all ages. Again, this interest, you know, to make, to create, you know, to learn something new, you know, was very evident, and it was really beautiful, you know, because there was conversations going on, you know, with everybody.
Yeah,
And I think
it wasn't necessarily, you know, planned in that sense so much as, you know, to bring women from different sort of walks of life. But it did unfold really beautifully in that way. And now I'm really missing being surrounded by people in my studio.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good segue for the next question in the Q&A. It says, what excites you the most right now? A new piece, collaboration, opportunity? And I guess that goes out to everyone.
It's always opportunity, and with making new work. I'll be starting a mural in a couple of weeks at the Northern Oklahoma College, the new Native American Student Center that they have there. Should take me a week to do, but it's kind of allowing me to kind of work in a new way, and I want to kind of create something new, as I was talking about how I'm versatile, and I really want to work in a new color palette for this mural, because it is a place of study, and I want this place to feel like a refuge and be a place where it can be welcoming. So I don't really want to use loud colors, but I want the kind of imagery to kind of pertain to, you know, what it is to be a Native American in my contemporary eyes and path, but paint something that can be inspiring for them to grow and move forward and to feel empowered, but also feel like they can set in this place and really feel it and be loved and be heard, basically. So, you know, that'll be something that's coming up for me. And then working on in the studio, working on about 10 new paintings, large scale paintings. And then the project in collaboration, I'm working with my mom, my mother here, with Native Oklahoma Indigenous activism from the 70s to now. So there's a lot of really cool things, and throughout the year, a lot of little other, you know, conversations and opportunities are going to arise as well. So busy year, but also a really cool and I think good year too.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
for me, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
All right. I'll talk briefly. You know, besides making, you know, new work and my own work, I also, you know, I'm going to echo what Yatika said, and that is I really enjoy doing projects that have a lot of unknown in them. And one of the projects that I'm working on is called In the Absence of Gathering, and it specifically dealt with, you know, the pandemic and, you know, the thoughts surrounding that. And I put a call out, you know, by social media, asking people to respond and pick up a kit, you know, that included everything for them to make a response to how you know, how they were feeling during the pandemic. And so, in the absence of gathering, you know, means what does that mean for you not to be able to gather in groups that you normally, you know, that you normally gather with? And you know, missing out on a lot of things, missing out on family dinners, missing out on large group gatherings. And so, you know, I just asked that specific question and asked them to do that in a way that had a narrative to it, but also a visual, you know, aspect to it. You know, the most wonderful thing about this kind of thing, when you put out that kind of call, is all I can tell you is that I believe in this process, you know, the creative process, and I know that what I return back is going to be 3,000 times of what I can give to somebody else. You know, that I'm going to see things that are go through every emotion that, we have as human beings, these responses that I'm going to see. And to me, that process, of just kind of putting materials out there and allowing people to make these responses is really powerful. It really speaks to the power of creating and making.
Yeah, I mean, I've been very isolated in the last year, I guess, like a lot of people, but right before COVID, I also left the fellowship, so was no longer working within a community of other artists. And so, these kinds of dialogues, being able to participate in them, and I've had the opportunity to do a few in the last few weeks, and have some more coming up. This has just been incredibly fruitful for me. And I just started a virtual residency with the Museum of Art and Design in New York. So that's another opportunity for dialogue and connection, both with artists and with a larger audience, since the conversation about climate is so integral to the studio work itself. And I'll actually be piloting trying to translate those sensing climate workshops into online formats. So there are a few of those coming up through the museum. And then in my studio, I just started a project about watersheds or river basins. And some of that comes from, I've moved several times in the last year, and thinking about flows and connections. And a watershed is, a land area where everything is kind of flowing into the same place. So it's another way to think about interconnections, and another way to think about what it means to be in a place where you're still very much connected to other places through the water.
It sounds like you're naturally trying to come to North Carolina before you keep talking potential projects here for the three of you guys. The wheels are turning.
Happy to come back to North Carolina whenever it's an opportunity. It's beautiful there.
Any other questions, Angela? Or I know we're at 8:18.
No, I just wanted to say thank you all so much for this conversation. I really appreciate you having it and being able to participate as a listener. I want to remind folks that this will be recorded and posted to our YouTube channel if you'd like to revisit any of this. I have posted the links to the websites in the chat. And also, please remember to follow the work of Nancy Strickland Fields at the Museum of the Southeast American Indian. So thank you all so much, and have a wonderful rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.